good evening, good afternoon, depending upon when you watch the show. Good morning if you watch the show on the internet in the morning. Welcome to Progressive Soup. My name is David Stevenson. We're continuing the conversation with John Kusumi, and I'll let John explain again to the audience what his political station in life is and what he's accomplished as a proponent of democracy in China.
Yeah, well, I took it upon myself in the 1980s to speak out and to represent the politics of practical idealism. And it continued, with the Tiananmen Square massacre and with the response, as it were. There's a grassroots organization, a group of, American students at the outset, and ultimately it came to include people from all walks of life, and it's called the China Support Network. And that's a group that, we now have a long history of standing with the leading Chinese dissidents, the student leaders, the dissidents who were in charge of the Tiananmen Square uprising.
We were talking when we broke off, we were talking about Walmart, and I want to maybe continue that a little longer about how Walmart, because we had a group of a couple of Puerto Rican gentlemen on last week on the show, and they told the story that was amazingly parallel to what we're seeing in the United States and specifically here in Danbury, in that San Juan, the capital of Puerto Rico, has been invaded, if you will, by multinational corporations. Your Kentucky Fried Chicken, your Pepsi, your Coca-Cola, your Walmart, and these other multinationals that have come in and taken over making and selling things in Puerto Rico, and you'll have the downtown of San Juan a ghost town, essentially, because all the mom and pops have been beaten to death by these multinationals. And we, of course, broadcast out of here in Danbury, and you'll see a lot of the same thing on Main Street in Danbury, where the Danbury's been a ghost town. It had a little bit of an uptick again when we had the Brazilians and the Haitians and the Salvadorans and other groups that had the small shops and restaurants before we had an incident with Mayor Boughton bringing in Immigrations and Customs Enforcement and chased a lot of them out again. But other than that brief upsurge and uptick in small businesses, we've had 20 or so years of a dead downtown here in Danbury. And likewise, I think there are a lot of Danburys all over America, and probably, in fact, all over the world that are taken out, if you will, by these multinationals. How does the talk about how the Walmart and China fit together? What is their relationship?
Well, Walmart has its very own trade deficit with China. In other words,
they owe money to China?
It's not that they owe. A deficit is not the same as a debt. The trade deficit is basically the money that you spend that is in excess of what is coming back to you in the other direction. So it can be said that between you and your nearest Sears department store, that you personally have a trade deficit, and because more of your money goes there
than comes
in the other direction.
Unless you work at Sears, and even then probably between the thousands of people that buy at Sears, have a huge imbalance to what the few people that actually work in Sears get as income. So the money's not recirculating locally as it would with a mom and pop store or mom and pop stores.
See, I'll tell you this. I've been in favor of increasing the tariff rates on Chinese goods. And
explain what a tariff is first for our audience.
Well, a tariff is basically collected at the border. It's as goods enter the country. It's like a tax, except that it's not a tax per se. It's not really something that is, for the individual workers in America. Actually, it's better for the workers in America because it's raising the cost of the imported good. All right,
and it encourages goods to be created here in America rather than somewhere else?
Yeah, if we want to value local production or manufacturing in the United States,
Which I'm sure we do.
and
Ideally.
ultimately, you know, we hear in the news that Obama is going to pivot and focus on the jobs issue, and it's kind of like, well, where's he been? Because he's had a full year now. He could have increased the tariff rates on China,
Yeah.
and therefore brought back some jobs, you know, that have been outsourced there. Now, all of this globalization of free trade, which, you know, I'm against it in concept, you know. In other words,
Sure.
who says that it's a good idea to have our supply chains stretching all the way around the world, you know, for the simplest little things? You know, the globalization of free trade has been occurring, and it's been occurring because of a few things. One is the low tariff rates. You know, the simple fact that the politicians are willing to make these deals, free trade deals, and lower tariff rates. But the other, you know, there are other important factors or wheels. In other words, the globalization would not have been possible without cheap shipping, cheap transportation.
Sure, which
right?
is generally predicated on the price of oil.
Well, yeah. In other words, if the price of oil suddenly went to $400 a barrel, you can imagine we would begin to value local manufacturing. We would want things made in the United States, things that do not have to be shipped a great distance.
Or in the other direction, if rather than oil going up, if we had green energy being created in America that was less expensive than oil, then we would have, it would give us that energy supply to make things in America much cheaper than the cost of making them in China, perhaps, and then spending the oil to ship them here. So that would accomplish essentially the same thing, it seems.
Yeah, well, you know, there's a transition that may be ahead of us, and all the way at the beginning of the 1980s, I started to advocate solar and hydrogen, and I said we should do more research into fusion.
Yeah.
But you know, the simple fact is that hydrogen can power vehicles.
Yeah.
And this may, in fact, be the green energy or the next thing that comes down the pike.
Yeah.
If there is a changeover, if we have a transition and successfully wean ourselves off of oil, you know, then we will again, you know, it will be the new form of cheap energy. And the hydrogen can probably power shipping from China just as easily as oil can power shipping from China. So actually, a successful energy transition would not solve the problem about outsourced manufacturing jobs.
Right.
But a successful transition
Well,
would at least give us some jobs.
It might in fact help solve that problem, because if you can make things cheaper here because you have a cheap energy supply, and they can't figure out a way to transport things from 10,000 miles away without using oil, without an expensive.
But that's, you know, assuming
that's
that
an expense added.
If ocean shipping, you know, continues to run on oil, then you're right. If the oil is higher in price, you know, that's a problem for shipping. But you know, you can't imagine that people would retrofit cars to work with hydrogen and not retrofit ships and airplanes and everything
So that's
else.
a wash, basically.
You know, in other words, every place where we use oil would probably be replaced, and you would have the you know, potential of a hydrogen-powered vehicle there.
And shipping would travel along with
So
trains,
yeah,
ships,
the shipping rates
ships,
would come down
trains,
at the same
and
time. So
vehicles.
that doesn't really solve the outsourcing of the manufacturing jobs, but at least it provides the green jobs that are required to do the enormous retrofit. If you think about it, you know, all those vehicles, if they need to run on hydrogen, you know, there's either, you know, an entire fleet of new vehicles that must happen, or there must be some retrofit to existing vehicles.
So this is one of the things they talk about, you know, government spending money. And we've had libertarians on it. We've had people from a lot of political stripes on the show talking with we progressives about jobs and about government spending money. And it really boils down to, it seems, we've all come to the conclusion that if government's not spending money, if government's investing money, and when we say investing, we mean putting money out knowing that we're going to get that back and then some by creating green jobs.
Sometimes there's an outlay that is clearly an investment because it has a break-even point.
Yeah, and you know you're going to get back more than what you put in, so that's a winner.
And
no
so,
matter who's spending the money.
You know, I recommended the solar power satellites, which means actually a system lofted into space. However, it collects, you know, solar and converts that. It becomes electricity in our grid. You know, they basically use microwaves to transmit the energy down.
Send it down, yep.
And that's a system that I advocated a long time ago, but it's something that means there's an economic return on investment. In other words, at the end of the tunnel, at the end of that building, you know, you've created an energy system. One of those solar power satellites can replace 5 conventional power plants on the ground. All right, and so that's the scale of what we're talking about. It's like you build 5 new power plants. Well, you know, America probably hasn't built a new power plant in the past 30 years. You know, I mean, it's
except for the
we'll build a couple of hundred stadiums.
Except for the so-called clean coal.
Yeah, we're the nation. We'll build 200 stadiums in a decade, but 0 power plants. But so I've advocated the solar power satellites, and you know, part of that is my interest in the space program.
Yeah.
You know, the technology and the flying around. You know, it's of interest to geeks and to science fiction buffs.
It's fascinating, but you're right. But there's apparently also a very good practical side. A lot of good things come out of the space program in terms of not just technology, but learning about how to things that have good practical applications in terms of solar energy and
there are
batteries.
Definitely side benefits, side benefits for sure. And in fact, all of the spending on the space program is actually the dollars stay on Earth. It is spending within our economy.
Yeah.
And so the employment is for, you know, the fields of aerospace, you know, engineers and so on. You know, it's not a bad outlay if it's an investment, if it has that return on investment.
And it's all presumably taxable income. It's income that goes into people's pockets that they either spend or they pay a small portion of, they pay taxes back to the government on.
Yeah, I mean, the space program has its own, you know, economic impact, and you know, I'm in favor of that because it's something that happens in the United States. It doesn't happen in China, you know. But the thing is that if I said to you, you know, let's make a manned mission to go and land a man on Mars, that could correctly be criticized, you know, just as a very expensive boondoggle. In other words, you're spending like crazy. You know, you're spinning your wheels. You're putting in all that effort, and ultimately, then what have you got at the end? You've got maybe a rock from Mars.
Yeah.
You know, it doesn't seem that like that's a great.
And you've got a headline that says, "Wow, we made it to Mars," and everybody says, "Oh, that's great, big deal."
Yeah, yeah. But having energy, having electricity that powers our grid, that is a worthwhile thing. That is you know, there's a merit to it because of the economic value of the energy.
Yeah. Let's transit back, because we started off in our first show talking about democracy in China and about some of the bad things that have happened since Tiananmen Square that we haven't heard very much about, because it seems like the world's media has pretty much shut down the process of talking about these things. It's happening, and it's just not being talked about. There have been other subsequent revolts or democracy movements in the world, and I'd like you to make some comparison between the one that happened in Ukraine, where you had the Orange Revolution, that one in particular, but perhaps have there been other democracy movements in the world? Well, let's talk about that compared to Iran also.
Well,
because Iran's fresh in our memories.
Yeah, that's a big one that's ongoing right now, and we should all wish well to the dissidents within Iran. You know, it would be excellent if they would take back their country and have a government that's, you know, more secular and less given to you know, the ideological extreme positions, and we would like to see an Iran that is more in concert with, the community, the international community.
Are there parallels between Iran and China?
There are, and in fact, we've seen the use of the internet to move information in the midst of the Iranian uprising. And there's, I mean, obviously there's Twitter and there's Facebook, and these assist in bringing out the information. But it also turns out that the Chinese dissidents have now a lot of experience because of what they call the Great Firewall of China. All right, and that means
firewall.
Internet censorship from Beijing. All right, and the Chinese have created software to get around that firewall.
So that the Chinese government, the party, has built a wall, and now the people are finding a way around, through, over, under that wall. Tell us more about that.
That's it. Well, the thing is that at the time of Iran, exploding into protest, and that was June of 2009.
Yeah.
There were Chinese dissidents who were opening their servers and basically supplying the Iranian dissidents with some software to help to get around internet blockages that were imposed by the Iranian regime. And so, I mean, that was great cooperation between, Chinese human rights activists on the one hand and Iranian human rights activists on the other hand. And so
wonderful.
it's good to see things like that. And really, we've had our community in which Chinese dissidents are one group, but very, very commonly the human rights rallies will also have the Tibetans or the Uyghur Muslims.
Yep, the Uyghurs.
Who are persecuted in East Turkestan, and there's also Inner Mongolia is still a captive region within China, and so Mongolians are another ethnic minority, and they are persecuted. And so we can create a human rights rally that has all of these groups working together, because by now there's a lot of experience. When you protest outside of, let's say, the Chinese embassy, if you go there and protest quite a lot, you will actually begin to see these other groups. You will meet, you will rub elbows with some Tibetans, with some Uyghurs, or even just the Taiwan independence movement. All of these people have reasons to protest the government of China, and so they are all found, lined up outside of the embassy or outside of the consulate, and we do actions in unison now. And we've also brought in some North Korean dissidents, some Vietnamese dissidents, and Burmese. Let's remember Burma.
Yes.
The nation that they tried to rename it to be Myanmar.
Myanmar, yep.
What is it? The nation formerly known as Burma.
I promised my audience that I would not draw a Seinfeld reference into this show, but I have to do that because, of course, if you remember from Seinfeld, Peterman went to Myanmar, and that was one of the episodes.
But
so
that's an illegal name change. In other words,
yeah.
The attempt by to change that name is the attempt of the military junta.
Yeah.
And really, it's still Burma, and the people are still Burmese.
Is it an attempt to stifle history, to create a new history, so to speak?
Oh, very probably. The military junta, would have been just as dictatorial as Chairman Mao. Just as given to grandiose, reform, quote unquote. And so, yeah, that's, the origins of the name change to Myanmar, it came from that regime, and the legitimacy of whether that should really stick is questioned.
Well, I'm beginning to get a little bit more heartened through our second discussion now, because I'm beginning to hear some good things. I'm beginning to hear some solutions to some very serious problems. You're telling me now about coalition building amongst different groups that are voicing their opinions in front of the Chinese embassy, hearing that, that we as Americans can stand up to multinational corporations just by basically saying no to buying their products, as in the case of Walmart. and buying locally made goods, local services. I'm hearing a lot of good things, a lot of, you know, there is hope.
Well, people can always come over to www.chinasupport.net. And so that's, you know, the China Support Network we are at, ChinaSupport.net.
And become part of your coalition.
And that's easy to...
And exchange thoughts about how to make the world a better place.
Yes, it's easy to make a connection on the web, but you know, since our second show here is, you know, stepping a little bit beyond just strictly the China issue, you know, as you speak about large multinational corporations and you know, how some individual people might push back, you know, 2009 is a well, we are now in 2010, but this incredible confluence of circumstances has arisen in American politics to the point where you now have, you know, the Tea Party movement saying that they're going to start to do, you know, I don't quite recall, did I hear, was it the general strike or something that's an economic action, you know, designed to actually ding the pockets of corporate America, and that's coming up within the next couple of months.
I wish them well, because if they're with us on that, then we'll have to give a little something back, a little...
I should say that
Here's back at you, Tea Party folks. If we can find common ground and find a coalition to build to accomplish things that we both agree on, then hey, strange bedfellows.
Yeah. I will say that I you know, count myself to be a practical idealist, and that means not literally necessarily a progressive per se, not literally or you know, Tea Partier per se, but I think that there's some amount of overlap. In other words, I can have affinity for some of the concepts, especially being fiscally responsible, you know, fiscally conservative. You
I think fiscally responsible is among progressives. That's our preferred term of use, because conservative, the word conservative has really been manipulated and changed over the last couple of decades. And in fact, that we had a conservative president for 8 years who was anything but fiscally responsible. And so we like fiscally responsible, because that really, in fact, speaks to the truth to the matter.
But think about it. There's one initiative, and it's coming from the Tea Party direction, that is a direct economic action. Yeah. But also now, have you seen in the news that Arianna Huffington, has put together this moveyourmoney.info, a website that just says, you know, get your money out of the largest banks, you know, Bank of America, Citibank, Chase,
into local banks,
into credit unions, or
keep the money local, where community banks, where Bank of America takes your money elsewhere and does with it as it will. As an example, Chase, Bank of America, and you have a number of very large banks. You have the local banks that reinvest locally, and that's the whole concept of keeping money within a community, whether that community be a Bethel, whether it be a greater Danbury area, whether it be Connecticut, whether it be the Eastern Seaboard, whether it be America.
And so there's one action from the right and one action from the left,
which
both of them, though, are, you know, economically impactful. In other words, it adds a different tenor to American politics, you know, to begin to get serious, to get down to brass tacks, to say, hey, let's stop putting our money there, let's deny them, you know, the support that they take for granted in other cases. And so from my angle, you know, from the practical idealists or from the China Support Network, I will say boycott made in China. And there you go, a third action. So left, right, and over here, we're saying, you know, it's time to do something in which, you know, the people push back against what has become, you know, sort of a tyranny of corporatism.
So here's an opportunity for a lot of very disparate groups that have probably a lot of things not in common to find one very important thing in common with one another and work together against a common enemy, which I think safe to say is corporatism.
It's an abusive system, you know, at least when the politicians are so given to kowtowing, you know, and to being the water boy, or, you know, running errands for, you know, corporate behemoths. I believe that the big boys should be able to pull up their own socks and tie their own shoes.
Sure.
And so why would we have such, corporate welfare, the bailouts, even the health care bill that is, we think might be on its way to Barack Obama's desk. This bill is going to arrive, but at this point now, it amounts to a giveaway to the health insurance industry.
Yeah.
And so it's corporate welfare, and that's something that I oppose, period. In other words, you don't have to be left, you don't have to be right, you don't have to be a, progressive, you don't have to be a Tea Partier. I can oppose corporate welfare just as a practical idealist.
Well, I'm going to throw one last word in about that health care bill, because, in fact, the only reasonable, logical, or sane solution to having health care is for it not to be for profit at all. It should be, like we have with Medicare, a single-payer, government-run, not-for-profit system, just like Medicare. Because, and again, we've been through this many times on the show with many different guests, but Medicare, the overhead is between 2 and 3%. That's all the administrative expenses involved in Medicare, because it's not for profit. And the average HMO, the average overhead is around 25 or 30%. And again, that's money being siphoned off by corporations, HMOs, pharmaceutical companies, and we don't know where it's going. But it's certainly not coming back to individuals the way we like to see. And capitalism, we love capitalism, believe it or not. Capitalism works best when it's kept on a small scale and when money stays local. It works fine. Human enterprise is a great thing. It walks hand in hand with human belief in standing up and being creative and having freedom. They all run hand in hand, but when this large corporate enterprise comes into play, it really throws sand in the gears.
Well, it especially throws sand if you mix
just
the
about
public
finished, so
and private sectors.
If you want to get one more point in about democracy in China and what we can do to help.
Yeah, well, I just in general would want to invite one and all to return to www.chinasupport.net. And we have some interesting things in which, we've been working on some American rock music. If you go there, you're going to be able to hear some of the songs that have been created for this cause.
Outstanding.
And so, yeah, we're looking forward to trying to popularize those songs. In other words, if you like what you hear there, reuse the tune. In other words, if there's a broadcast station, or if you yourself are a podcaster, reuse the material.
So you put it into the public domain rather than trying to make money off of it. That's great. Well, that's where we have to wrap it up. I'm David Stevenson. We have John Kusumi, and we'll have you back for further shows.
It's good to be on your show.
We have a lot more to talk about.
Thank you,
Thanks
David.
very much.